Hello. So in this video I'm going to talk to you about Aristophanes' play Plutus. So this is a very late Aristophanes play, which is unlike pretty much all of his other plays. The critical introduction to this edition actually calls Plutus the only surviving example of middle comedy, though from what I've read in other places there's a bit of debate about whether or not this is actually an example of middle comedy or a kind of transition between old comedy, which is what most of Aristophanes' work does, and middle comedy. So Plutus is distinct from Aristophanes' other plays for a number of reasons. Probably the most overt being that it's not a directly political play, it's more of an allegorical play. So Plutus is the god of wealth, who has been struck blind by Zeus, which is why the unjust, the dishonest, and the corrupt so often gain wealth, while the just and the honest so rarely do. So this is an allegorical kind of satire. The two Greeks, Cremulus, who's a citizen, and Cario, who's his slave, find the blind god and determine to restore his sight if he will then reward honest people with wealth and dishonest people with poverty. So they do this, or they set about doing this. At one point they have to debate poverty, who comes along, again, very allegorically. To me, this section where they debate poverty and she's trying to argue that, in fact, she is the source of humanity's productivity, humanity's creativity, the sort of basis for people doing necessary work to support society, etc., etc. This section where they debate poverty, to me, sounds a lot like a medieval morality tale. Something like Everyman or Mankind or John Redford's play Wit and Science. Again, these very allegorical things where characters named for particular virtues or vices or whatever it is come out and make arguments from their particular perspective. So we've got that element of it. It's also a mythic story, much more so than a typical Aristophanes play, because earlier Aristophanes plays tend to focus around political issues and tend to focus around direct Athenian concerns, whereas Plutus is much more abstract. So there aren't necessarily direct references to particular individual citizens. The characters in the play are engaging with deities, with Plutus, with Asclepius, who's the god of healing, with poverty, with Hermes, who comes along at the end to try and sort of negotiate a position for himself. Because what happens after they get Asclepius to restore Plutus's sight is that the people stop making offerings to the gods. Because one of the premises of the play is that people make offerings to the gods in order to gain wealth. So that's the one sort of direct political component, or direct socio-political component, is the satire of greed and sort of politico-religious corruption. So Cremulus at one point actually convinces Plutus that Plutus is the most powerful of the gods because Zeus's power derives from his wealth, and that the reason that human beings sacrifice to the gods is to gain wealth. So Plutus asks, "Men sacrifice to Zeus for me?" And Cremulus says, "They do. And whatsoever in the world is bright and fair and graceful, all is done for you, for every mortal thing subserves to wealth." So this is part of Aristophanes' sort of politico-cultural commentary that human beings are exclusively driven by a desire for wealth. This, of course, free market fundamentalist capitalists today now assert again, even though there's a long history of human interconnectedness that suggests the opposite. But I'll set aside my political commentary. And we do again get these sort of bits of Aristophanic anti-democratic sentiment that we've seen with a lot of his other plays. Like at one point, just in passing, the chorus says, "I'll bear me like the god of war. What, shall we push and hustle in the assembly to gain our 3 poor obols, and today let wealth be wrested from our grasp?" So this is about protecting Plutus from those who would attempt to steal wealth from him, or from them, rather. So we've got that line, "Shall we push and hustle in the assembly to gain our 3 poor obols?" So again, this is a theme that we've seen, or an idea or critique we've seen before in Aristophanes, that citizens only engage in their civic duty in the ecclesia, the Athenian democratic assembly, to the extent that they're being paid for it. And this was a big critique that Aristophanes makes in a number of plays. But the other thing that we've got that's interesting about Plutus is we have a figure who becomes really dominant in new comedy, which Menander is sort of the great writer of, at least in terms of whose plays have survived. Menander is one of the great writers of new comedy, and then we see it also in Roman comedy through people like Plautus and Terence. So we've got this figure of the witty slave, or the wise slave, Cario. And Cario is Cremulus's servant or slave, and he has a tremendous amount of social insight. So we actually get this from his very first speech. He says, "How hard it is, O Zeus and all ye gods, to be the slave of a demented master. For though the servant give the best advice, yet if his owner otherwise decide, the servant needs must share the ill results. For man's body, such is fate, belongs not to himself, but to whoever has bought it. So much for that. But now with Loxias, who from his golden tripod chants his high oracular strains, I've got a bone to pick. A wise physician seer they call him, yet he has sent my master off so moody mad that now he's following a poor blind old man, just the reverse of what he ought to do. For we who see should go before the blind, but he goes after and constrains me too. One who won't think even with a grrr. I won't keep silence, master, no I won't, unless you tell me why you're following him. I'll plague you, sir, I know you won't chastise me so long as I've this sacred chaplet on." So, Cario, right from the beginning, has insight about the proper things to do and the mistakes that his master is making. Now, ironically, it turns out that Cario is wrong, and following the blind Plutus and eventually persuading him to reward them with wealth in exchange for returning his sight is actually the right thing to do. But consistently, Cario has these insights, this almost sort of realpolitik type insight about the proper way to get along in the world.